Hey guys, welcome to this new video, this new tutorial. I thought I'd do something a little different today, just to celebrate Halloween, do something a little fun for you. So we're going to create this entire little scene here from scratch in Houdini. The video is going to be a little bit longer, just because we are doing so much from beginning to end. But it'll be broken up into little chapters for you, so in the YouTube video you can just jump to whatever you want to do. We'll cover a lot of different techniques, and hopefully this will be fun for you, and that you enjoy it. And I hope that you guys have a nice Halloween season. So, without further ado, here we go. I'll see you soon. Okay guys, welcome. This will be the first chapter of our Halloween special project here. I've already gone ahead and set up my file structure, my folder structure, and just sort of saved a base file here. But let's start by just sort of dropping down our containers of all the different things that we're going to be working on. And then I'll make these into chapters for you, so it's easier to navigate the video. So you don't have to scrub the timeline and try to find it. So this is all the stuff that we know for sure we're going to make, and if we decide to add anything later on, we can do it. I do need some template geometry for scale reference. Okay, so probably the first thing that we want to do, since our hero object that we're looking at in the scene is this big giant cave that is carved out of a big giant rock that looks like made to look like a skull, right? So it's like you enter into the mouth into this cave. It's not obviously a real skull. It's just, you know, somebody came along and carved it in a big giant boulder or something like that. So we should probably start with making our skull reference and scale appropriate to like an average person. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and bring in our model, which for the record I got for free, probably from like Turbo Squid, or I've had this for a long time, so I don't quite recall. My point is that this is really easy to find. If you just do a quick search, you'll find like a super basic skull that you can use for free. So I'm just making a quick selection of part of it, and then Shift G of this lower mandible here, and then I'm going to drop down a blast because I don't want this lower jaw. And then I'm going to transform it, and with my person sort of there, well, let's just rotate this a little bit, -45, and then we'll bring it up just a bit so that the teeth are sort of sitting on the ground level, and then we'll start bringing this up to, this probably helps if we go to a wireframe, we can see a little better, you know, get a sense of how big we need to get so that it looks like a person could sort of walk in this mouth. That's the whole idea. So this template geometry here, this person, you know, is it conceivable that they could walk in here? That's the idea that we're going for. So you get the gist. I think you know what I'm talking about here. Where is... Yeah, okay. So let's raise this a bit. There we go. So something like that. So you see the teeth, the bottom teeth are sort of touching the ground, and it does sort of conceivably look like a person could easily walk in there. So maybe just a little bit bigger, and maybe tilt it just a little bit more, like something like that. And that kind of looks more like believable, as though it could happen in real life as far as scale is concerned. And get this back to smooth shaded, and I think that's a good start. So since we're on our skull, and that scale and the tilt and all that is pretty much how we want it, let's just go ahead and add some UVs. Depending on where you get your model, I mean, you may have UVs on it or not. In my case, I didn't. It was just a basic model. So there we go. That textual density is a little way too large of a scale, so let's just fix that with a simple UV transform, and scale this Larger numbers are going to make smaller textural density. So this is more like what I would go for if I'm going to use like a material displacement, which we will in this video. So I think that's about the extent of what we need to do on the skull. So we have a reasonable scale reference there, and now we can get to work on our ground, and that will be our next chapter. Go ahead and pause this, and then I'll see you in a second. Okay guys, this will be chapter 2, and we'll work on the ground, creating the ground for this scene. So I think we're just going to start with a simple circle, and we just hide everything else so we can see what we're looking at. This is what it actually looks like by default. We want it on the ZX plane. The normals are facing the wrong way, as you could tell by the shading by default. So we're going to rotate that on the X 180 degrees, and then we'll bring back our skull, and obviously we need our ground geometry to be much bigger. Something like that. Right, so about, what is it, 115 meters or so across. A little bit more resolution on the edges, although it won't matter that much because we're gonna put our camera, we're not really gonna see the edges, but just for the sake of aesthetics in the viewport, let's just do that. So by default there's no UVs, there's no division in this, so if we're going to do actual geometry displacement via noise, we need to have some division here. One of the things I like to do in a situation like this is just to use a simple divide, not an edge divide, a divide, there we go. And well, we don't want convex polygons, I do want bricker polygons. Avoid small angles, don't use any slivers, just in case. And what that just does by default for me is just give me this like really nice super basic quad mesh, right? And this is at a pretty sufficient resolution that I can do some nice position noise on it to do some real basic fun stuff with it. So just to give you an idea, you know, if we were to drop down an attribute noise on the position, you know, you could see we already get some basic stuff here, right? Now that's a little ugly at the moment, and we're going to dial that in a little better, but hold that thought. First thing that we want to do is we want to make it seem as though this skull has sort of been sitting on this ground for, you know, many years or what have you, and there's like this sort of indentation in the ground. So an easy way to do that is to first bring in our skull in our ground container as a reference object, and just going to hide all these so we can actually see what's going on, and then do an attribute transfer, right? So we'll do an, oops, if I could spell, attribute transfer, there it is. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the geometry to transfer attributes to, which is going to be our ground, and the geometry to transfer attributes from is our skull, and we know we have our skull because there it is. And if we do this and allow the P attribute, you can see what happens is that everywhere the surface edge of the skull is intersecting with the ground, it tries to pull up the polygons to sort of like mold around it. And we can make some adjustments in the conditions here with our blend width to sort of smooth that out a bit, and maybe lower the distance threshold so it's not so wonky-do. And then something like that is a really good starting point, right? So already just out of the gates we have something that looks a little bit more natural and organic. We do have a problem or a challenge to address, is that if we want to walk into this cave, we can't, because this is, you know, the ground is in the way and it's blocked out. So how do we fix that other than, you know, making a selection and moving polygons? Well, we already have this attribute transfer here that can take advantage of groups, and these would be either a point group or a primitive group. So that gives us a clue that we can actually guide this deformation that's happening in the ground, probably with a mask of some kind. So let's go ahead and do that. We can do a paint, and let's just do like a group paint. That's going to be a primitive paint group, right? So if we change our view to that, hit enter, and say go to a top view. And this is really just pretty crude, but what we'll do is we'll just paint the areas where we want the deformation to occur, just on the outside of this, like that, and probably just give it a little bit more range there, so the polygons are stretching a little bit if they need to, and that's probably an okay start. We'll see where we get with that, and that becomes our group. So let's call this GRP, just say impression. It's a ground impression, and then we'll change this to $OS. And actually this is a point group, so I lied earlier. This group paint is going to be a point group. So in our attribute transfer, what we can now do is say our destination group type is points, and point to our group impression, and now only the part that we painted is what is going to be pulled up, and now we have that sort of entrance, whoops, that we wanted there. And we'll smooth all this out, don't worry. This is kind of janky looking right now, but that'll look much better in a second. What else would make this look even better? How about we'll turn all of this into kind of like a hill area, so it's like a raised mound area in the ground, and we'll use the same idea again, and we'll do another paint, except this time let's see if we can do, we'll do a group paint. That'll be fine, and then because we're going to smooth it out anyway, and then this will be, I already know we're going to call this group hill, and we'll change this to our $OS, and let's do the same thing. We'll go into a top view, really increase our brush size, and let's zoom out just a little bit. So let's say this entire area around all this, we want it to be a raised hill in the terrain, probably including some of the impression area, and maybe we can imply that there's a little pathway to this, something like that, let's see where that gets us. Escape out of that, and we'll use another, at this time we'll actually use a noise, so we don't need to use a transfer. We'll just use a position noise, and we'll use it on our group, which is the hill, and you can see it only raised that, but we only care about the Y, and now we can start dialing in how we want it to look. So maybe a greater amplitude, something like that, so it's kind of like semi-buried in a hill, hard to see, and element size is pretty crazy right now, so something like that, maybe just a little bit of variation, and that's probably okay for now. Certainly good enough to move on, and then now we need to address sort of the rest of our makeshift terrain and make it more interesting here. So let's name this raise hill so that we just know what we're working with here, and then we'll do another noise, and this time we'll affect the remaining areas. So the way we can do that is we can just select our group, this hill, and we also don't want to affect the impression, right? So what you can do is to not select this is just put an exclamation point in front of each group, and then that way it will only affect the remaining polygons that are there. So again, we'll keep this amplitude kind of low. I'm going to use sparse convolution just because it's a little bit smoother, and maybe change this to more like a terrain smoothing, although you can't really see that if you're using kind of smaller element sizes. and maybe a little bit more amplitude, so we just get kind of like a mounded ground, you know, just little ruffles there in the ground. Okay, now let's take all this and make this smoother. Alright, see, pretty easy peasy. And this is going to need UVs, so let's do that. UV unwrap, and chances are our textural density is going to be not quite what we want, so let's do another UV transform and adjust the scale on this a bit. Something like that is probably okay, and I think we can consider that a reasonable starting point. Out ground, clean up our network a bit, and there you go. Pretty simple setup there. Let's go up. I don't need that test geometry anymore, really. Okay, so that's a good starting point. So you could see that, you know, our scale is going to be okay by the time we start putting other things in there. If we just sort of figure out a camera angle that we might like, so say something like that. And the cool thing about this setup is that it is basically parametric, right? So it's flexible, so we could go in and, you know, say we made changes to this skull transformation, goes to other objects, and you know, say we rotated this a little bit, you know, the ground is going to update, you know, based on what we did, right? Unless we, you know, move it outside of the painting areas, obviously we'd have to repaint that. But you can see that, you know, our little impressions are updating without us having to remodel anything, which is great. Another great reason to use Houdini. Okay, so that's a good starting point, and just make sure, yeah, everything has their UVs the way we want them. And we'll conclude this chapter, and then in the next chapter, let's start with building some of our environment elements like the trees and the rocks. Alright, so I'll see you in a second. Okay guys, welcome back. We're going to go into, I think, make some trees right now for this scene setup. So let's just start by bringing in our ground, because we're going to scatter a bunch of trees over it. And there it is. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and hide everything else just because I don't want to be confused by everything else that's there. I'm going to go ahead and use one of the labs tools, which is the labs quick basic tree, because this will save us a ton of work and a ton of time, because we're just going to do some basic sort of dead tree kind of stuff. First we need a line because that's our guide shape, and it'll create a little tree from that, as you can see here. And the tree is going to be as tall as our line, so we're not going to use 1 meter, probably something that is maybe 4 times or 5 times or so the size of a person. Probably a good start, maybe something like this. And we'll start dialing in some settings. I don't want any leaves just because I want to make this nice and spooky looking. So this will be our tallest tree. We're going to make a bunch of trees here and make a collection out of them. And a mature tree is going to have a much wider trunk than this, so let's go with something like that, like it's really old. And for the sake of aesthetics, as far as, you know, when we view the scene through the camera, it's probably not a good idea to have a bunch of low hanging branches, you know, obscuring our view. So let's raise this up a good bit, like maybe halfway, maybe even a little less, and we can probably not really tell that much. I was going to do some more growth generations there, but it doesn't really show up that much. Let's think about maybe a little more sag on the branches, so probably something like that, or even that, right? And maybe that it's a little too thick on the trunks there. Let's try that. Okay, so that would just be like our starter, you know, sort of tall tree setup. Now let's make a couple variations, and we'll just make this next one a little bit shorter. So let's see, we'll go to 8, and it's a little bit younger, so we'll go something like that, and we'll start a little bit lower, something like this maybe. Let's see if we can get more. No, it doesn't really show up too much there. Okay, and that should be okay. These are all going to be scattered everywhere and rotated all kinds of different directions, so we don't need to worry too much about how detailed we get with everything. Let me change this over here, and let me make another copy here. Give that a second, and these will be like the short little sapling trees that are dead in this dead forest. And this we can make really thin. Maybe start these a little bit lower. Right, something like that maybe. And okay, I think, you know, just for a quick and dirty setup, you guys can worry about a lot of the minutia stuff. When I'm recording these videos, I like to try to keep the time to a minimum if I can. So there's no reason for you to sit here and watch me tweak a bunch of parameters ad nauseum. My babbling is enough. Okay, so now we have like a collection of our trees, right? Now, if we want to scatter these onto our terrain, there's a couple things that we need to do. And first thing we need to do is take a look at our terrain and scatter some points onto it. But we're going to use scatter and align because we want the alignment features of that. So let's... Alright, so obviously we don't want trees everywhere on this because that would be unnecessary for our viewing angle, and also some of the other elements we don't want to obscure in our scene. So let's paint some guides here, and I'm going to use an attribute paint this time because the scatter and align has a density feature that will allow us to use a density attribute, which I'm going to create in our paint node, right? So let's pop that in there, go to here, go to a top view, and it's probably easier if I make this smooth shaded, although it's still showing us the wire. That's fine. Hit enter, and let's increase our brush size with the middle mouse wheel, and just like generally where I want trees to appear in the scene, I'm just gonna start painting. So I'm thinking about where my camera is going to end up, and it's probably going to be over here somewhere looking this way, so something like this, right, and looking into the scene that way. So I don't want anything obscuring my view, and let's make this a little bigger, make it a little faster. Yeah, but you know, I do want stuff on the side, which is fine. And I can go through and just shift just to sort of smooth all this out, so it doesn't look like there's a hard edge line on the trees when we scatter them. Alright, and maybe even in some areas I could lower the foreground a little bit and just make it, you know, not as dense, you know, something like that. And again, just sort of smooth it out, you know, however you see fit. Okay, let's just call that a good starting point. Now I made a mistake already in that I didn't first name my attribute density. So if I paint this and then now go back and say, oh yeah, this is supposed to be density, I'm gonna lose everything that I did, and I had to repaint, but I don't want to do that. Now the good thing is that I could just rename it back to mask and it still has the data there. That's fine. But now when I go into my scatter on the line, I need to make sure that I call this mask to get my points. So my little flub, sorry about that. And let's go back into this view here. And that's way too many points. We don't want to crash Houdini, right? So let's start with kind of a low number just to get our bearings when we copy our trees here. So how do we do this? Let's do a copy to points. And before I connect anything, I'm going to make a couple of changes here. I'm going to create a piece attribute that's going to sort of cycle and randomize through the trees. So I know I'm going to use this here, and I'm just going to probably call that piece. And I'm going to pack and instance everything that comes in. And now I need to create a connectivity from my collection here. And what this does is it takes everything that's coming in and just creates a collection basically of all the points. So each object is its own little point reference that you can then use in a scatter, a point cloud, any kind of point cloud, to sort of iterate through the different points and sort of randomize your clone pieces, right? So we'll do a from pieces, attribute from pieces. And what this does is it takes your point cloud, which is what we have here, and then it takes your geometry library, which is what we created with this connectivity node. And if we do that and then say the piece attribute is actually called piece, now all we have to do is make sure that we're connecting things here correctly. So we need our geometry to copy, which is our from our connectivity here, and then we have our point cloud, which is here, which has this attribute. And since we already created all this, we should have what we want. Now in this particular case, this is kind of a unique result, and this has everything to do with the way that the quick tree, this is basically an HDA, so it's just like a little template. And the way that this was constructed is that we have all these different pieces of leaves, stems, trunks, groups. And we have a trunk group, we have point, prim, and vertex attributes, and all of this stuff is sort of being picked up in the point cloud, and excuse me, it's getting a little wonkadoo, right? So long story short, without boring you too much with the technical details, is that we have far too much data than we actually need for any of this. So we have a couple of options here. We could take the long road, which is dropping down delete nodes to delete attributes and figure out what we need and blah 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 blah. But really, all we care about is just the geometry as a whole and just keeping the UVs. And one of the easiest and quickest ways to do that is to simply pack it. Use a pack node. So let me just zoom in on this tree here, just to show you what I'm talking about. You can't see it here, but there will be UVs. So we want to transfer the attributes from the existing setup, and all I care about is the UV, right? I just want to keep the geometry in the UV. I don't care about anything else, because we're just doing a really simple, quick setup. And now that sort of cleans everything up for us, and we'll just rinse and repeat that whole thing. Drop another one of those down for the other tree, keep the UVs. Same idea. If you want to just copy that, just drop it in here, you get the same result. And now your whole collection has everything that you need and everything works. Alright, so we've got all these trees copied, and each one of them has their own unique UVs, but we do have some wonkiness in terms of the scale and all that kind of stuff, which we can address right now. We'll do that very quickly. So after this attribute from pieces, actually first let's go into our scatter and align and randomize some of this rotation here, and also fix some of these weird trees sort of shooting off in weird angles. So in our alignment we can do blend with the Y axis and maybe tone that down a bit. So you have, you know, some leaning, which is fine. And then in our rotation, you know, let's just do a negative value for one and a positive value for the max angle, and that way, you know, each one of these points has a randomized rotation angle, and that already improves what we have. And then what else? So if we look at it from afar, scale is really wackadoo. Scatter and align is giving us an orient and a p-scale attribute, and we can take advantage of that with a little more control by using an attribute randomize and saying, okay, I want to use the p-scale here and use the first value. Well, this doesn't matter because it's a float value anyway, so it's only reading the first value in this array here. So, or a transform matrix, I should say. And our minimum value, let's just say, you know, we want to keep something that is something like that, and so 3/4 of the original size to, you know, 150% of, you know, what its original size was, and then just sort of iterate through that. And you know, we could sort of cheat camera angle here and just sort of look at what we're looking at and just look at the silhouette, and if we decide that that's really not quite what we want, we could do something like create a little more variation. So maybe the trees are taller and some of them are just a hair shorter, you know, just to create a little breakup in that. And yeah, again, this is minutia, just sort of dial the taste. And that is essentially all you need to do the trees. So we'll do out trees, and that gives us all the copying and the packing and the UVs and all that stuff that we want. I would encourage you, you know, as your networks start to get more complicated, just to start naming things, just so you have an idea of what is what. I won't bore you here with that. So that'll conclude this chapter, and then in the next one we'll do pretty much the exact same process, but we'll create various rocks. Okay, so I'll see you in a minute. Okay guys, welcome back, and in this chapter we're going to work on creating our rocks. I'm going to go ahead and hide my trees for the moment, just to make it a little bit easier on the eyes when we're working on this stuff. And for the rocks, we're going to bring in our landmass again, because we're going to use that as a scatter template, scatter source, and which is our ground. Same idea, we're going to hook this up to a paint. We're going to do a group paint, right, or attribute paint, I'm sorry, because we're going to use scatter and align. Let's turn off these UVs, go into a top view, and actually, you know what, let's go back and turn on our trees just for a second, just so we can see where they're going to end up. Goes to other objects. Okay, so I can see that I have a lot of candidate area here where I want to scatter some rocks. So let's just go ahead and start painting that. Increase my brush size, and I want all these rocks in the foreground, you know, to be here, scattered around. In this case, I'm not going to be terribly upset if there's some overlap with the rocks and the trees. There are methods to use the scatter and align to not have that happen. But with something like this, I'm not really trying to be super precise about it. I'm more concerned about just sort of iterating through an idea. I just want to get the idea down and just sort of see what we're having to work with, and then, you know, then you could dive into all the detail minutia after. Like right now we're just trying to get an idea down, right? So, you know, I can come in here, and actually probably the better thing to do is to smooth this out, right, like that, so things sort of blend in to the background a bit. Something like that. Right. Okay. Good enough for an initial setup. Oops. I meant to hit that. Okay. Escape out of that, and I've got, let's see, rock scatter, rock paint, whatever. And again, I did the same thing. I didn't rename it to density. I just kept it as mask. Oh well. Let's just use our scatter in a line and change this to by density and use my mask attribute that I put so much time and energy into painting. And there we go. And that's going to be our template points. And we know from the past setup that we need to create some variations in our geometry. So let's get started with that. I'm just going to use a simple sphere. I'm probably going to create like maybe 3 or 4 different rock types here. So let's start with polygon. There we go. And here I'm just going to hide everything else so I can see what's going on. And I'm going to need some more geometry there because I'm going to deform this with an attribute noise. Just change the position. I'm going to make this 0 centered so it stays where it is. Lower the amplitude a bit. Maybe something like I'll do like a fast noise, so it's a little bit more like that. Simple jaggedy kind of stuff. Maybe lower the element size or something like that. And then from here what I can do is for each one of these iterations I could make you know, like tall rocks, you know, squished rocks kind of stuff. So for this we obviously don't want anything uniformly round, so we want to do some kind of change because you're not going to find that in nature, even though we're we're just doing very basic setup here. So let's go ahead and actually before we do that, let's make sure that we're adding UVs to this. And I think at this scale that textural density is probably fine. So let's do just align these nodes real quick. Okay, good enough for rock and roll. And then the second stone, let's just say I wanted something that was a little shorter and yeah, a little bit taller like that. So you know, and I could change my noise seed if I don't like the shape of it, so something kind of like that is probably okay. Now this one, since it's tall, you can see the pivot point is in the middle, so half of it's in the ground, so it's kind of strange. So this one we're probably going to want to put in a transform here and just sort of raise the y-axis just a hair so it's more like it's sticking out of the ground by the time we're done. And let's move this over so we have room, and we'll do another version. This one we'll do, say, more flat, like it's a squished little stone that you're kind of sitting on actually. So this should be a little wider, something like that, you know, kind of like a sitting rock kind of thing. And obviously we don't need this transform here. And maybe something even smaller, so just kind of like a pebble kind of thing. So we'll do 0.15, so something really small like that. And again, we'll do a different offset just to give it some variation, although that's really kind of ugly. Wow, that's just really kind of crazy. Alright, I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, good enough for rock and roll. Okay, now I'm going to take all of these and put them in a merge so we can create a collection just like we did with the trees. And now we have all of our stuff, and we want a connectivity node because this will help us create our collection of meshes. And I'm going to name this the piece, although this is not necessary to do that. For me, that's just kind of a sanity thing. In my brain, it just makes more sense to have it as a piece and not a class. it's going to function the same, I promise you. So we're going to do a attribute from pieces again, and we need our point cloud, which is this, and we need our stuff here, and it's piece, and then we need our copy to points, which I'm not going to connect right away, just because I want to go in here and make sure that everything is named or set up appropriately as far as attributes. The reason I do that in cases where like we're doing a lot of instancing or something like that, it's just really kind of easy to hang Houdini or crash it if you're not careful. So for me, it's just kind of a habit to do that. And there we go. We have a pretty reasonable setup, although, you know, again, with the randomization, we can go into this one. Actually might benefit from a little randomization of the cone angle, you know, so you can sort of tilt them in different ways, and you know, again, we'll rotate them. This is just an arbitrary number, you know, do whatever you want there. And what else? We could randomize the piece scale like we did before, just to give ourselves a little more control on that, which is always a good practice, because then you have like direct control over what's happening. So some of those rocks are probably going to be too ginormous for our scene. Let's just bring back everything else and get an idea, you know, what we were looking at. So probably something like that is okay. Maybe a little bit more variety, so something like that. And then let's just maybe increase our density of this now that we have everything set up safely. And again, this is one of those areas where it's kind of a season to taste thing, so you might look at some of these rocks and decide that you don't like some of the shapes, so you can go back and, you know, tweak your shapes up here in the sphere nodes, which is totally fine. That's up to you to do that. I find that a little bit too busy, noisy for my taste, so I'm going to dial this back a bit. And also with the scale, let's just finding this a little distracting here, so maybe something like 0.3, maybe 0.4. Okay, let's just do that and pop that into a null. As you can see from looking at the viewport, everything does have UVs on it, and it is packed geometry, so it should work pretty nice and easy in Solaris, which we are eventually going to get to. And now, great, so we're kind of almost there. In the next chapter, we'll build this little stone wall. We'll create like a parametric stone wall that sort of follows the shape of this hill here, and it will be really easy to modify later on and art direct, you know, as you see fit. All right, I'll see you in a second, guys. Okay guys, welcome back. I'm going to do this quick little insert chapter here before we start working on the stone wall. It's probably a good time to sort of check our scale overall. So remember when we brought in that test geometry really early on, we should probably take a look at that and compare that to all of the other elements in our scene here. I've gone ahead here and just sort of moved it closer to where the camera is going to end up being, just to give us an idea. So there's a couple things that stand out to me right away. Is that I'm okay with the hill and the skull size, which is just going to be a giant rock formation. Things that seem like they probably need some adjustment are the rocks themselves, and maybe even the trees. But I'm going to go ahead and make those adjustments just by adjusting the original sizes of those objects in our collections. I'm not going to have you sit through a video of me doing that, but I just thought it was important enough to just leave a quick little chapter, a little message, just to say it's a good time to check your scale as you're going, so that you don't get so far down the line that, you know, you have so many things to worry about, right? So in the next chapter, you'll probably see this looking a little bit different because I'm going to adjust various elements. Okay, and that was it. I'll see you in the next chapter. We'll actually work on the stone wall then. All right, I'll see you in a minute, guys. Okay, guys, welcome back. So just before we get into the stone wall, I just want to tell you what I changed. So in that previous little bonus chapter, I talked about adjusting your scale, and I have my little template geometry here, color-coded in red there. I just dropped down a color node, put my little dude there, and I just went through and used the attribute randomize for the P scale and the trees and the rocks, which we already had, and all I did was adjust the ranges a little bit so that it looked more natural and appealing, at least to my eye. And I also increased the density of the rocks. And then the last thing that I did real quick was I took my hill. We had a noise node that we raised on the y-axis, call it raised hill, and I just lowered that a bit because it was a bit high, so it was kind of obfuscating things that were of interest to look at. So those are all the things that I did, just the three little things, and that's really it. So without further ado, I'll just hide some of the stuff that I don't care to look at while I'm working on the stone wall. And let's just get into the stone wall here. And I'm going to bring in my landmass because we're going to use that as a template to draw our wall. I don't know, some of you might be kind of wondering at this point why we haven't used high field terrains at all in this whole thing, and why is that? And you know, you could totally do all of the things that we're doing that way, but I think for just iterating through a quick idea, I didn't really find it necessary to kind of make it as complicated, you know, using this height field, going through all the different various, you know, steps for all the noises and the conversions and the blah blah blahs and all that stuff. And I mean, it's fine if you're really used to that workflow, which, you know, for me it's fine as well. But if you really just kind of quickly you just want to dive in and just iterate an idea down without a lot of too much technical mumbo jumbo, then, you know, this is a perfectly suitable way to do it. So that's all. Anyway, that was kind of a divergence there. Okay, so how are we going to do this? We want to have a wall that basically follows the shape of this this hill, right? So like as it undulates, you know, we want it, you know, the wall to feel like it's kind of sunk in the ground and it's falling apart in some places because it's been there for so long. And so a real easy way to do that is make it curve based. So we have this handy node here called draw curve, which allows us, if we go into the projection tab, to use live projection, where we can send rays, and send rays to what would be the projection onto geometry, which is what we're feeding in here. And if we hit enter on the node, we have a way to draw on what our projection plane is. In this case, it's our little terrain that we made. Now I have a pen tablet which I'm going to use to just draw around where I just have an idea of where maybe this old wall was, and if you don't like it, you know, just delete it if you're really picky, and then I'm gonna redraw it for myself like that, something like that, and that's it. And you can see that it creates just points. It's not uniform density, so I am going to do a resample on this because I don't really need all those points, to be honest with you. If you have watched my previous tutorial on how to create like simple stone structures, this is along the lines of the same thing. Actually, we're using a very similar process to do that. It's just curve based structure. We're going to do some extrusions and make some cuts into this with some Boolean geometry, and that's really all it is going to entail. It's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to use a poly extrude. For the first extrude, I'm going to take the curve and I'm going to pull it up, and then that's going to be by the point normal because we started with point normals, right? So I'm going to go up, probably keeping in mind the height of our sort of template character, maybe about twice the size of a person, something like that maybe. And That's it for the first one. Then we're going to do a second extrusion, which is going to be just pulling it back or forward if you want, like that or that. That's fine. I'm going to go probably maybe 1.5 meters, put a back on it, and it's just as simple as that. There's my base shape for the wall. And if I look closely, you can see that it does in fact follow the shape of the terrain, which is wonderful, right? That's exactly what we want to do. And then we're going to make some cuts into this with some cutter geometry, which we're going to create right now, and then use a Boolean. So let's drop down a sphere, and then throw down a noise after it just to give it some randomization. First, let's change this to polygon with a little more frequency. I know we can't see anything at the moment, but let's change our view to this, and we don't need to see these points. Do position, zero centered, so it stays, you know, at its origin. Let's do something like a fast noise, which is fine. We're going to make the sphere bigger by quite a bit, and let's template our wall where we're at so we can see. Let's maybe hop into a top view and then go back to our sphere node, and in the viewport hit enter. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can grab, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see this little XYZ plane there. We're just going to grab that so it stays pretty much where it's on the plane that we care about. And I'm just going to choose some areas that I want to cut out of the wall, so maybe there's a good one. And I'm going to switch to my front view just to make sure that I'm actually covering the wall, right? And whoops, I didn't want to rotate. So I just wanted to, okay, let's do this. Go back to my top view. I'm just trying to scale it like that. And, you know, something like that, right? And then I can duplicate this by hitting Alt. Same idea, highlight the sphere here, and I'm still able to move this where I want it. Something like that. It's a cutter geometry. Go into my front view, validate that I'm covering that, and let's do another one. Maybe somewhere like in the back of this wall, make it like the top is falling apart or falling away, something like that, and then we'll move on real quick. Alright, so back to my top view, my sphere selected. I'm gonna grab this little XZ, come over here, scale this like much bigger, go to my front view, raise this up so it's just the top. Let's do this. So quick little tip, I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but I've seen others. When you go into these orthographic views, if you hit the shortcut key, so in this case it's space 3 to get the front, if you hit the same shortcut key again, it'll switch to the opposite, so the back view, right? So if you're, like in this case, I need to see the back here of this wall. It's just a way to toggle between the views there. Okay, so I'm back in perspective view, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge all these shapes together into like a little collection, right? And just sort of quickly validate that they're sitting where they're supposed to be sitting. And that's fine. I just want to make this really rough. It doesn't have to be anything magical or super complex. And then just drop down a Boolean. Make sure it's set to subtract. I'm going to unique all the points, and I want to subtract A from B. So I'm going to make sure that the wall is my first geometry, and then I'm going to subtract the spheres from it. And that will give me these cuts, right? So I have this very crude shape of some cuts out of it, and now I'm going to turn this into little stones by first doing a remesh, which is going to be, I like to use the labs remesh. There's nothing wrong with the regular one really, but I don't know, I like the ease of just getting in here, and you know, you could leave it just like this by the defaults, which is probably totally fine in our case, or what I like to do is just change it to poly count and try to keep it reasonably low, especially in something like this. Like I don't need high detail geometry because I'm just going to turn this into a VDB anyway, and you know, create my stone shapes from it. And then let's clean up our network. Okay, and then from here I'm going to first scatter some points onto this. Now this, in this method, the total count is going to actually indicate the number of stones that we end up with. So while we're iterating through, you know, a creative idea, it's good to just sort of keep these numbers low, just in case you run into any, you know, problems with your computer or whatever, and something, God forbid, hangs or crashes and all that. So while you're sort of setting things up, just keep it light. And then we're going to do a Voronoi fracture, Voronoi. This is going to be our template point cloud, and it's going to calculate. And it is hard to see in the viewport here, but it has made all these like little jagged cuts here that will represent our stones. Now we're going to use a for loop to iterate over pieces to make each one of those pieces, each one of these cuts, an actual stone. That is only going to work if we output a piece attribute, which by default in the Voronoi fracture is turned off. So we're going to check this box, and then I'm going to save right here. For loops are always a little iffy, especially if you're not very careful with how you set things up. And I'm going to change this piece attribute to piece, because that's what's coming out of the Voronoi fracture, right? So now I can start doing things to each one of these little pieces. And the first thing I need to do is convert it to VDB, right? So VDB from polygon. We'll drop that in there and change our view flag to the end here. Give it a second to do some cooking and change to a smooth shaded, and you can see it made all the cuts. So each one of these cuts now is actually an individual piece, which we can do further stuff on. So that's a little rough looking. Let's do a smooth on that, a VDB smooth to be specific, right after that. And this tends to be a little aggressive, so let's probably put that down to 1. And this is one of those things that's it's a, you know, work on it according to your taste, right? You can work on these shapes and dial in these parameters. I'm going to just make some very quick adjustments here. So if I'm going to go to my scatter and take these relax iterations down to something like 1, just because I feel like this is a bit too uniform to my eye. So I have like more of a variety in shapes there, and you might like that or not. It's entirely up to you. There are hundreds of ways to do things in Houdini, and you just have to choose what is suitable to you. Now we need to take each one of these pieces and make them polygons again. So we're going to do a convert VDB right after this smooth here, and the default setting needs to be changed to polygons, and then we're going to get a bunch of polygons. And if we go back to our wire shaded, you'll see that that is indeed the case, right? So now we need to make sure that each one of these pieces, these stones, have UVs on them, so that when we do our material shading and decide to use displacement in the shader, you know, we can add more detail to this, which is the beauty of having a setup like this. So we could go further and, you know, do some rotation on the pieces and all that stuff. That's what I did in my tutorial about the simple stone structures, but I think with the shot being as far away as it's going to be, I don't really think it's necessary, because we're not going to be doing close-ups, but at a minimum I guess we definitely do need some UVs on each piece, right? So let's at least do that. And okay, clean up our network stuff and feed this into a null, and out stone wall. And we should be in reasonably good shape. Again, pretty simple, not too bad, not too many nodes. notice that there weren't any expressions, wasn't any vex code, there wasn't any of those things that we had to do. I mean, we're just sort of quickly iterating through a fun, just creative idea. We're just sort of like, it's like drawing. It's just like we're making a painting or something, and we just want to just slap some stuff together and see what we get. Right? So that's not bad. I mean, it's kind of cool looking, right? Pretty simple to set up. We have a nice, cool little story of what's going on there, and in the next chapter we'll take all of this and we'll jump into Solaris, bring everything in, set up materials, and make it look nice. Okay, we'll also do some lighting and all that fun stuff. Alright, so I'll see you in the next chapter. Okay guys, welcome back, and now in this chapter we're going to bring everything in Solaris and set up our materials and lighting and all that kind of fun stuff. I think I'm going to disable the view on this template geometry. I don't really care about it at this point. And let's hop into Solaris now that we've built everything, and change this to our stage. And I don't really need the tree view right now, and I'm going to import my stuff. Import all. Scene import all. That's going to go through and read everything, and then the very first thing I'm going to do is sort of just get a rough camera angle that I think I'll like later on, that will look interesting, and maybe something like this, something like that, something like that, and then create a camera just sort of as a placeholder view, and unlock this, go back to my scene import all, and there's a couple of changes I need to address and think about since we're working with point instances with the trees and so forth, more specifically with the trees as it relates to UVs. So without getting too complicated with everything, all you have to do is go to this primitive definition under SOP processing in the scene import all, and where it says packed primitives, you want to change this to point instancer. Okay, and that in the case of the labs tree is going to make sure that the UVs are being brought in. When I had it as the native instancer, for some reason my UVs, at least in my setup, they weren't working right on the trees, and I found that changing this to create point instancer works. I'll let you dive into the manual and all that stuff, and as to the technical reasons why, but that's not why I'm making this video. This is not to bore you with all that stuff. This is to be fun and create something cool to look at. So cool. First thing that we're going to do here is create a library. And we're just going to also create an assign because we know we're going to need it. And we're going to create a bunch of materials. Alright, I'm going to hop inside. I'm just going to use the principled shader because that's pretty easy to do, and it works pretty nicely with Karma XPU. So the first one is going to be ground, and I know I'm going to need one for the skull. Now I already have some PBR textures that I've already selected ahead of time, and like I said, you can find those online somewhere. There's a whole bunch of places that you can get free textures, and that should be fine for you. The ones that I'm using in this video I can't share with you because I actually purchased them, so I'm not gonna violate the copyrights there. And let's see what else. I'm gonna use actually a couple of different rocks. So let's just call this stone wall, and then this will be rocks. Okay, cool. And I'm just going to start setting up these shaders. I'll do the first one in the video, and then I'll pause the video and set everything else up so you don't have to watch me do the whole thing. But basically all I'm going to do is go in here, first start by changing my base color to white so that's not tinting my texture color, so that my base color. And then I'm just going to go to my project folder. I have a texture folder here. And what am I working on? The ground. I already have ground textures here. For base color, I have roughness there. I think there's also an occlusion in that set that I saw just a second ago. So yeah, AO, and then I'll go to my normals, enable those, grab those, which is right there, and I also have a displacement, which is fancy. Alright, so let's grab that. I saw there was a cavity file. I guess if you wanted to use that, you could do that. I think is there one in here? So many options. Yeah, I don't see it. Okay, whatever. And that's pretty much the setup of one material, right? So I'm going to go through and finish up the rest of these, and I'll see you in a second. Okay guys, I've already gone ahead and finished up the setup on all these, and once you're done, just go up and we're going to clear this library and autofill materials, and all of our materials are then set up for us. And then we can go into assign and control click on the first one here and select our ground geometry, control click on the material path and select the ground material, and we'll just add another entry, and we're basically going to rinse and repeat for all of the elements in your scene. And again, I'll pause the video and finish that, and I'll see you in a second. Okay guys, finished all that up, and once you finish, the viewport will update. Obviously we don't have any lighting and all of that, and you know, the roughness and all that stuff is not quite what we want it to be. So we can start making tweaks if we need to, for instance with the coloring. Right now I think what I'm gonna do is throw down a environment light and just see what we can do here. First let me save, and I do have an HDR library that I'm gonna pop into here, HDRI, and I like this sort of gray sky there, and we're going to create some fog as well. So just real quick, let's drop down a Karma render node, and then we'll just start, let's just get a read on where we're at, and then we can make changes, right? So I'm going to save and Karma. Let's see what we got. Give this a second to figure it out. And then here we can sort of assess our colors, our displacement. I'm not liking how red this skull is, and I also think that the displacement probably needs to be adjusted so that it has more of a rough rock texture. And maybe this wall here is a little too gray dark. We could probably color that or tint that a little bit. Yeah, let's just start with that. So let's just hop into our material library real quick. Go to our skull, and two options we have here. We can go right to the base color and turn down this tint intensity just a little bit. I mean, you see if you turn all the way down, it'll, well, in the render, it should be bringing down. Yeah, there you go. Guess you got to see it in the render. So I'm just going to tone that down a good bit to something like that, maybe, and maybe even tint it with a little bit of a darker color, like that. And then I'll probably jump into displacement and maybe increase that to something like 0.25. See if I get some more ruggedness in the shape, even from afar, which is what I'm getting. So I kind of like that. And then what else did I say I didn't like? The stone wall. Right, so the stone wall was a little too gray. So whatever that texture is, whatever's going on there. I mean, as far as dark gray, the color, and maybe I want to bring a little bit more red into it. So let's do this and just really desaturate it quite a bit. Bring that down, way down, something like that. And I am kind of going for a sort of a monotonish look to this overall scene, so that's on purpose. Okay, and then what else? I think for now that's good. I'll just move along with the video here. You guys don't have to see me nitpick on everything. So that's a good starting point there. And then I'm going to save here, and let's work on our lighting, right? Because right now we just have this HDRI, and it looks, it looks okay, but this can really come alive a lot with some really cool lighting. So let's start. I'm going to create like a moonlight rim light on this rock formation here. So let's start with an area light. I think we'll probably do the trick there. And what we can do is change this from a rectangle to a disc. Change the exposure and change the size quite a bit, and then let's hop into where we're looking through the light so we can position it. And I'm just going to zero my scene out there. Oh, sorry, I should have locked that. Look through light, the area light, lock it, and then do that. And now wherever I'm looking is where it's going to be pointing that light. And this is just kind of weird what's going on in the viewport there. So I want to catch sort of like a rim light on the edge here of this skull and this terrain and the wall and so forth. So kind of high up like that. And that ought to work. And now if I go back to my camera view and try a quick little test render, let's see what we got. That light needs to be probably a little bluer, but not so saturated, obviously. And you can see what I'm talking about. I might even go a little further on that as far as making it more of an edge light. Let's lock this and tilt the angle down and more to the left there. And then go back to my camera view. Take a look at that. And I might decide, later on, move it more to the back, and that could be kind of cool. But for now, let's tone this down a little bit and then work on something else. So let's drop down kind of like a campfire light inside of this skull here to make it look like there's like a torchlight inside there, perhaps. So let's rename this to Moonlight, and then we'll do another, let's do a point light this time. Drop that down, and let's go to a top view. Oops, I didn't mean to hit that. Zoom in on that a good bit. Get in there, maybe go to a side view. Kind of hard to tell, so let's move this up, and then go to our camera real quick, do a quick little test render, and if it's intersecting with any geometry, it's not going to actually show anything, so we have to just make sure that it's not intersecting with anything, and then obviously increase the intensity, see what we get, something like that. Cool. Just for starters, there we go. And then you can go further with it. You could probably add some lights in the eyes if you want, or whatever you want to do. But yeah, let's add some fog to this. Let's move along here. Move along. I'm sure you guys want to move along. Let's save this, and right before the karma, let's drop down a fog box after the lighting. And it comes in really tiny, so let's just get to a top view here and get our scale way up there, right? And we can see the handles here, and all we really need to do for a fog box is just make sure that we're covering our camera view, right? So you can see the edges of the box here. So on the what is this, the X? Yeah, that's going to be the X-axis, so we would probably want to make sure that those edges are outside the bounds of the edge of the view here on either side, and that's going to be fine. The ground is fine, and then the Y, oops, that was interesting, it kind of did the opposite of what I wanted. Let's go higher. Just making sure that it's outside. So like this corner here, we don't want that. We want that to be up a little bit out of the view. And I think that's probably a good start. So good place to save. Sometimes these things are a little sketchy. And clearly that's too much fog density, so let's bring this down to something like 0.02. See if we can start to see some stuff. Not quite what we want. So again, you're just dialing things in until you get what you want. Right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have, this is probably, this front leading edge here is not quite covering what we need to. So go back to my camera view. It should be okay. Yeah, there we go. We got rid of that edge that was in the front there. And now we can come back even smaller with this density and start to get something that we like. Right? Now once you start adding fog and things like that, obviously the renders are going to take a little bit longer. So I think what I'll do here is I'll pause the video and pump up the samples a little bit so you guys can get a better idea of what's going on here. Hold on just a second. Okay guys, so yeah, you can get a sense of what it's going to end up looking like here, and we could probably stand and add some depth of field to this camera so to make it even more interesting. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get back to our Houdini GL view, go back to our camera, which is up here, and I'm gonna jump into my top view again, select my camera, okay, hold on. Okay, and now I want to select my camera, which should be showing up there somewhere. I don't want to have a camera tool, I just want to get my focus fresh from there. Okay, not sure why I'm getting this behavior, but it's not what I want. I don't want that. That's odd. Okay, so something strange happened there where I'm not getting the top view when I'm trying to adjust this. Let me pause the video for a second and try to figure out what's going on. Okay, no rhyme or reason as to why that happened that I could tell. I just had to toggle back between a couple of these different nodes here, but anyway, I just once I'm on the camera here, what I intend to do is just hit enter so I can see the actual controls here, and then I just want to right click on it and grab the focus handle so I can see where the focus is going to be, which is usually this little second red square. I'm going to bring it over to the skull there, and now I can go back to my perspective view, which is what I'm in. I actually went into perspective view to sort of fix this little weird issue. Go back to my camera view, and I will adjust my f-stop to probably something like 0.2 to start. I'm going to save here. It's just because I started to get some weird behaviors that make me a little suspicious. Change my view to the camera. Give it a second to cook up its render. I'm going to pause this while it dials in here, so give me a second. Okay guys, so okay, you can see that there's some depth of field now, and we're starting to get closer to what we want. And at this point, I think there's a couple things I might want to change, like maybe change the camera angle, and probably even the brightness of that moonlight, which is a little intense. So let's go ahead and I want to change this a little bit, which means I'm probably going to have to change my my depth of field, which is also fine. which we can do that. And I'm going to go ahead and select my camera again. And you can see because I moved my camera, my focal point changed. So I do want something like that. Go back to my camera. And this is probably cool. And then that light I said was a little too intense. Whoop. Yeah, 254. Great. 25. I'll kick off a render and hit pause for a second. Okay, guys. I think that's bringing in enough to really see what's going on. See, I changed the camera angle. The depth of field looks better. I'd probably go in and mess with the materials a little more on this skull and so forth. But I think at this point, I mean, that pretty much covers all of the fundamental stuff of like how to do all this, and I think the rest of it really would be just me sitting here tweaking a bunch of things and probably boring you to death. So I think I'm going to end the video here and let you guys sort of play on your own, and I hope that you enjoyed and got some use out of everything that you saw today, and I do appreciate you hanging out and watching all this. And if you do have any questions or anything like that, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to help people out. I mean, that's the whole reason why I make these videos, just to help, you know, general artists, you know, just sort of get things done in Houdini, and realize that how powerful a tool it really is, especially when you want to iterate through different ideas and go back and change things on the fly without too much pain. Okay, anyway, I'm babbling. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate it. It definitely helps with the channel. And I will see you guys in the next video, which I have no idea what it's going to be, so suggestions are welcome. We'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.